Okay, they've just taken their last vote. They're coming back now in a matter of minutes. So if you have a seat, I suggest you take it, or you will lose that seat. So if everyone could sit down so we can get going, I'd appreciate it.
Hello, hello, hello. Mic check. Hello, hello, hello.
Testing 1 2. Check. Testing 1 2. Check. Testing 1 2 1 2. Testing 1 2.
voted? On this vote, the yeas are 414, the nays are 0. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that Representative Eric Paulson of Minnesota be removed as a co-sponsor of H.R. 4529.
Without objection, so ordered. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 1137 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 169, House Resolution 1137, resolved that upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to take from the Speaker's table the bill, H.R. 2847, making appropriations for the Departments of Commerce and Justice and Science and related agencies for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2010, and for other purposes, with the Senate amendment to the House amendment to the Senate amendment thereto, and to consider in the House, without intervention of any point of order except those arising under Clause 10 of Rule 21, a motion offered by the Chair of the Committee on Ways and Means or his designee, that the House concur in the Senate amendment to the House amendment to the Senate amendment with the amendment printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. The Senate amendment and the motion shall be considered as read. The motion shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the Chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the motion to final adoption without intervening motion.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 hour.
For the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions. All time yielded during consideration of the rule is for debate only. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I also ask unanimous consent that all members be given 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks on House Resolution 1137.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, House Resolution 1137 provides for consideration of the Senate amendment to H.R. 2847, the Hiring Incentives to Restore Employment Act. The rule makes an order a motion offered by the Chair of the Committee on Ways and Means or his designee that the House concur in the Senate amendment to the House amendment to the Senate amendment with the amendment printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the motion except those arising under Clause 10 of Rule 21. The rule provides that the Senate amendment and the motion shall be considered as read. The rule provides 1 hour of debate on the motion equally divided and controlled by the Chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means. Madam Speaker, in today's economy, many families are struggling to make ends meet. As we know, the economic recession began in 2008 as a direct result of reckless and irresponsible financial decisions. We are still dealing with the wreckage today. Over the last few years, I have heard countless stories of people struggling to put food on the table, pay their mortgages, and provide for their children. And millions of American seniors are making decisions every day to skip meals or cut their pills in half just to survive. California, and in particular, my constituents in Sacramento, have been greatly impacted by this economic crisis. Many of my constituents were and continue to be victims of predatory home loan lending, unfair credit card practices, payday loans, and other forms of unscrupulous business practices. They turned to Congress for help, and we responded with the CARD Act. And the ink was hardly dry on that legislation before credit card companies tried to find loopholes to arbitrarily raise credit card interest rates and fees on consumers. This Congress also passed the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, which will bring much-needed oversight and accountability to Wall Street. This bill also creates a new Consumer Financial Protection Agency to protect consumers from unfair and deceptive financial practices. Meanwhile, small businesses are seeking assistance to help make payroll.
resume the markup. Is the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Pence, within hearing range of my voice? Apparently he is. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today's markup of HRES 252, a resolution that would affirm the Armenian Genocide in the United States record, I know is a sincere effort by the leadership of this committee and many members of this committee to mark a dark chapter in history. And let me say, without ambiguity, and with a heavy heart for the families that would be looking in and who join us today, I believe a genocide was committed against the Armenian people in the early part of the last century. And it should never be forgotten. The Bible tells me as a Christian to mourn with those who mourn and grieve with those who grieve. And so we do today in recognizing that fact. And the families and the loved ones of victims of those terrible events that began more than 90 years ago have my heartfelt condolences. I do not minimize or deny the horror of what took place, neither do I accept the contention that those who were lost were collateral damage. The fact that more than 1 million Christians were killed makes the loss even more personal to me. In recent times, U.S. presidents have annually remembered the Armenian Genocide. President Obama noted last April that it was, quote, one of the great atrocities of the 20th century, and I associate myself with those comments. Now, while we should never forget this genocide and the lives that were lost, and the lives that are still marred to this day, I sadly cannot support this resolution. The old book also tells us that there's a time for every purpose under heaven. And I would submit with great humility that now is not the time for this committee or the American Congress to take up the measure that is before us. As you are aware, Mr. Chairman, more well aware than I am from your experience, as the ranking member has said, Turkey is a strategic partner in our ongoing efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan. They share our interest in defeating international terrorism and seeing secure and free nations emerge after many years of war. Currently, Turkey has more than 1,700 troops in Afghanistan, and their efforts certainly have been noticed by al-Qaeda. Last month, Osama bin Laden's chief lieutenant, Ayman al-Zawahiri, specifically cited the role of Turkey's forces operating in Afghanistan as being a problem for al-Qaeda. The basing and logistical support that Turkey also provides is quite simply vital to our efforts in the Middle East. Incirlik Air Base, for example, has been a staple of American power projection for decades. For the continued use of Incirlik Base, our lease must be renewed with the Turkish Parliament on an annual basis. For our continued partnership with Turkey and Afghanistan, our relationship must also be renewed and respected. I believe we should not, at a time of war, take that relationship in any means for granted. Mr. Chairman, given the fact that American troops are at this very hour in harm's way in Iraq and Afghanistan, where they depend on supply routes available through this important relationship that we enjoy with the nation and with the people of Turkey, I believe it would be unwise for the United States Congress to choose this moment to speak on this undeniable dark chapter of human history. Before the committee took up the last resolution in 2007, we heard from every living former Secretary of State and Defense, each of whom stated that this resolution would be unwise during a time of war in our nation's history. And I associated myself with that position then, and I do so today. We must proceed in a manner that is compassionate toward those Armenian families who were affected by this genocide so many years ago, but we must also remember the families of those who serve in harm's way on behalf of our nation and on behalf of freedom in the war on terror today. And so I rise today in respectful opposition to this resolution, but I do so with deep respect for those on this committee and those that would be looking on, that would have the American people be heard on this point. While I cannot support this resolution, let them at least know that this American identifies with their loss, acknowledges those tragic events, of so many years ago, and offers my condolences to the families who still bear the burden of what was, in fact, a genocide. I urge my colleagues to oppose this resolution and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman has yielded back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, is recognized for 5 minutes. He moves to strike the last word.
I move to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the chair. Mr. Chairman, if this were a symbolic vote in which this committee were being asked to provide a rendering of history, this would be an easy vote. There is no question about what happened 95 years ago in Ottoman Turkey against the Armenian people. But it's 95 years later. We have a modern, constitutional, secular, democratic government in Turkey. It is arguably the model, the secular alternative model for the Muslim world about which the United States cares deeply. It is a strong United States ally that has helped us in NATO, has helped us in the Middle East peace process historically, has a base on its own soil, and as Mr. Pence indicated just now, has actually troops in Afghanistan side by side with American troops. The United States has a great deal at stake in the Turkish relationship. And I believe that if we pass this resolution today, we jeopardize that strategic relationship in little and big ways. And I, for one, do not want to take responsibility for such action. I think, questioning no one's motives, it would constitute an irresponsible action by this committee, given the importance of this bilateral relationship. I also think at some point we have to recognize that we cannot be passing resolutions judging modern-day governments for the actions of previous generations, however horrible they may be. St. Patrick's Day is coming up. I would love to have a resolution condemning the British government for the potato famine that killed over a third of the population of Ireland. That was genocide against my people. Or we could talk about condemning today's contemporary Russian government about the depredations of the Stalinist past in the 1920s and 1930s. Why not do that? Or the Spanish government for the genocide that occurred with indigenous populations throughout the Americas and especially in the Caribbean where they were fully wiped out. We could go on and on under this logic and with this justification, and all of it would be true. We have to look at the consequences of our actions. We have to, at some point, as Americans who are concerned about American diplomacy and American interests, to move on. I want to see reconciliation between Armenia and Turkey. I want to see us close this tragic chapter in the past, but I don't want to do it this way, and I'm not sure at all, in fact, I am sure, that the wrong way to do it is for Congress, frankly, to pontificate on this issue and act as if there will be no consequences when we do. I hate having this vote because it implies that one is unconcerned about what did happen in the past and about history, and nothing could be further from the truth. This vote is not about the past. This vote is about the future of our relationship with a strong ally. That's how I frame this issue, and I hope that's how my colleagues do, and that's why I will be voting no on this resolution. I yield back.
Gentleman has yielded back the balance of his time. The chair notes that there will be votes most likely at 1 o'clock. It would be, for the chair's purposes, ideal if we could vote before we go for those votes. So I just remind members that, number one, their statements can be put into the record in full, and secondly, to the extent that they can shorten their remarks, it's their decision. As the gentleman from Virginia just did, it would help make that possible. The gentleman from California, ranking member of the International Organization's Human Rights and Oversight Subcommittee, Mr. Rohrabacher.
I move to strike last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Let me disagree respectfully with my colleague. This is about the past. not about the future, it's about the past. Let me note that I personally would have preferred that this resolution not be brought up. It is about events that took place almost 100 years ago. It is about a crime committed by a government of a country, the Ottoman Empire, that hasn't existed for nearly 100 years. It is about a crime in which the perpetrators and the victims are all dead, with a few rare exceptions, 3 of whom are with us today. Furthermore, it is an issue that has little or nothing to do with the United States. With that said, this legislation before us, I have looked into the history of this legislation and the historic events that it comments upon. And let us note there was an Armenian uprising in an attempt to gain independence from the Ottoman rule. In that uprising, there was widespread killing of civilians, both Turks and Armenians. The Ottoman troops suppressed the uprising, and had it ended there, this resolution would not be before us today. The Ottoman government, after putting down the uprising, decided to put an end to what they saw as the Armenian problem. The slaughter that followed, the slaughter of defeated and unarmed people, mostly non-combatants, was a crime not just against Armenians, but against humanity. So, because I am now confronted with voting for a resolution about this many decades-old issue, but I am confronted with a resolution that is basically truthful, I cannot vote against truth. I would add this, though, that this resolution is being supported based on the belief that it will, at long last, close the book on an issue that should have been resolved long ago. My vote and the vote of my colleagues is not intended to create more conflict, but instead to resolve it. Specifically, this is a vote to set the record straight and to get the issue resolved and behind us. This is not an endorsement of reparations, demanded for which, and a demand for which will not bring about healing, but will open the door to new and unending conflict. This is about the truth. It is not about reparations, which will not right a wrong of 100 years ago, but instead will create more conflict today. Let us resolve this issue, not open up new conflict. With that said, I will vote for this resolution because it is truthful. And the truth is also that Turkey is a friend and has been a good and reliable ally, a nation of Muslims who represent a democratic and moderate force in the Islamic world. But because they are a positive and important force in the world and a friend and have proven their friendship, does not mean that we should refrain from acknowledging the truth when we are confronted with it, especially if it is a truth about a crime of long ago, but to basically refrain from acknowledging a truth when it's there that you have to make that decision because it will upset a friend is not a reasonable supposition. If Germany, which was so important to us during the Cold War, would have been upset that we acknowledged the Holocaust, and it was suggested that I should vote against a resolution acknowledging the Holocaust to spare Germany's feelings, I would have rejected that notion, and I would have voted to acknowledge the Holocaust. Today, we reconfirm our commitment to truth, the truth of history, and we offer a sincere hope as well that our friendship with Turkey is strong enough to withstand the acknowledgement of a darker moment in that country's history. And we have darker moments in our history as well, as do every country. And you get past those darker moments and you shut the book by acknowledging the truth of what wrongs were committed in the past. And America has committed wrongs in the past. That doesn't mean we need to dwell on it, but they need to be acknowledged in order to correct it. So with that said, I will be voting for this resolution. And now that I've gotten both sides of this issue mad at me, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Tanner. For what purpose do you seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word,
You're
Mr.
recognized for 5 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to submit my statement for the record, but before so doing,
without objection, your statement will be
let me
included.
make one observation. A lot has been said, but it is my view that the timing of this resolution is not in the best interest of the Turkish government, the Armenian government, or the United States government right now. These governments are in consultation, and the timing of this is not in the interest of furthering what I view to be a disposition of this matter. Thank you.
Gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall, for what purpose do you seek recognition?
Seek recognition to move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I think the chairman, it's a very difficult vote. I, in the past, have supported this resolution. I do think that the historical truth is that genocide took place. And the record is replete with that evidence. Ambassador Morgenthau, who we've mentioned before, talked about a campaign of race extermination that was taking place under a pretext of reprisal against rebellion. We had the full cable from the American Embassy in Constantinople that talked about protecting Armenians from violence at the hands of those of other religions and to prevent the massacre of non-combatant Armenians in Turkish territory. John Paul II stated the Armenian Genocide, which began the century, was a prologue to horrors that would follow. This Congress has already passed this resolution 25 years ago. And then, of course, we have Adolf Hitler's famous words when he said, in defense of invading Poland, who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians? I see that as truth, as my colleague from California. I don't question the truth here. I think we all see it for what it is. I wish the government of Turkey would recognize it for what it is as well. What I do question here is the timing. Secretary Clinton testified before this committee just last week, and she said on this very issue that it is our position that normalization process that Turkey and Armenia have undertaken carries important benefits for both sides and should take place without preconditions and within a reasonable time frame. And then she says, but the best way to do that, with all respect, is for the Armenian and Turkish people themselves to address the facts of their past as part of their efforts to move forward. And in that spirit, we are working very hard to assist Armenia and Turkey in their efforts, and we would like to continue to support that effort. And then lastly, she says, and not be diverted. She's referring to this resolution as a diversion from the process. The documents I read, some sensitive, said that this resolution, as we have a protocol, the two governments who I think are in the best position to carry this out, the documents I have read said that this resolution will derail the process. Derail the process. A historical commission has been formed to get to the truth of this, but derail the process. This resolution, I don't question the truth again, Mr. Chairman. I question the timing of the resolution because I see it harming Armenians and the government of Armenia more than helping. I see the border with Turkey not being open and commerce not taking place. And lastly, I see it harming something near and dear to my district, and that is the troops. As the ranking member mentioned, I was given a classified briefing. I read documents on this very issue. It is my opinion that this resolution will put our troops in harm's way, could potentially endanger our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. And what do I say to the mothers and fathers in my district whose sons and daughters are fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan? What do I say to them? Yeah, I voted for this resolution, which puts your son or your daughter in harm's way. How do I explain that? No, this is not the right timing for this resolution. I would urge the chairman to, particularly in light of the administration coming out just recently, begging the Congress to hold off until this normalization process and reconciliation process can go forward and let the two respected governments handle this issue rather than the United States meddling in this overseas. We know from the last time what the reaction is going to be, and I don't want on my head, if, God forbid, action was taken to endanger our troops serving in Afghanistan and Iraq, I would not want that on my end.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to yield.
I appreciate that, and I have great respect for the gentleman's efforts to look into this and for his consideration and the seriousness of the issue he raised. But I do have to say that I have been in this Congress for 27 years. Some people think all or some of that has been too long, but 27 years, and I have never seen a time when it was the right time to take up this resolution in 27 years. I yield back.
And I appreciate the chairman's remarks. I think that, however, the difference between now and the last time this matter is voted upon is the fact that there is this protocol established. There is a reconciliation process established. It's my view that it would be better if Turkey and Armenia could work this problem out. And my hope would be that Turkey would acknowledge the wrongdoing. And let's all move on. Let's move forward with this process. Because ultimately, it's up to those two governments to work out this issue. And I want to be clear on the record that I believe that this was genocide. But I question the timing of the resolution.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Massachusetts, the chairman of the Europe Subcommittee, Mr. Delahunt.
Yes,
for
thank
what
you,
purpose seek recognition?
I move to strike.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
You know, I would echo the final sentiments expressed by my friend from Texas. You know, this is an historical agreement between Turkey and Armenia, and I believe it represents something that is a watershed moment in the relationship between those two nations. And it has the potential to stabilize an entire region, a region where we have substantial national security interests. The protocols include a timetable, and it calls for the development and normalization of relations between these two countries. And it's currently, as I'm sure has been stated, under consideration by the legislative bodies of both Turkey and Armenia. And if it's ratified, it would open the last closed European border and establish a roadmap for normalized relations at long last. It would obviously have significant benefits for Armenia, increasing its political and economic and cultural links with Europe, and in opening up the possibility of Armenia to join the European Union. And let's remember that this agreement was negotiated and signed by the Armenian government. In fact, after the agreement was announced, the president of Armenia, President Sarkisian, went on a diaspora tour, including stops in Paris, New York, and Los Angeles, to persuade diaspora Armenians that the protocols, and now I'm quoting him, do not harm Armenian state and national interests, but on the contrary, and this is the critical language, open new opportunities for resolving the centuries-old feud between these countries. Reconciliation between the governments of Armenia and Turkey would certainly benefit our own national interests. And passage of today's resolution undoubtedly is going to provoke a highly negative reaction within Turkey across the entire political spectrum and could sidetrack the normalization process between Armenia and Turkey. That does nothing for Armenia, it does nothing for Turkey, and it does nothing for the United States. Yesterday I had an opportunity to meet with the chair of the Turkish Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. Murat Mursan, and this is what he stated to me. If the House Foreign Affairs Committee passes H.R. 252, it will imperil the normalization process and could become a permanent impediment towards passing the protocols in Turkey that everyone on this committee, I dare say, supports and embraces. Most importantly, and this is what my friend Mr. McCall alluded to, the issue which is the subject of this resolution is one that Armenia and Turkey have agreed to deal with. This is the pertinent language. There's a determination to implement a dialogue in the historical dimension with the aim to restore mutual confidence between the two nations, including an impartial scientific examination of the historical records and archives to define existing problems and formulate recommendations. Let's not put that process at risk by passing this resolution. I'm very concerned that passage of this resolution, as I said, will undoubtedly hinder and might very well terminate the possibility of success so that the Armenian people and the Turkish people can address this issue and move forward. And we, as the Foreign Affairs Committee, may well be seen as knowingly sidetracking a peaceful and prosperous future for both peoples. And I urge, and I intend to vote no. I yield back.
Gentleman is expired. The chair is prepared to propose that by unanimous consent, we take the vote on this resolution at 2:15. We'll seek to get as many people recognized as possible between now and then. Is there any objection to that proposal? Part of my consideration was I was told you would be back by 2:15.
Reserving the right to object.
I take it that's an objection.
We're reserving. Did you hear an objection?
I heard a
plea.
I heard a complaint that constituted an objection.
What does that mean, Mr. Chairman?
It meant that the gentlelady is asked to be
Mr. Chairman, reserving the right to...
well, just a minute there, Mr. Massachusetts. Reserving the right to
on your
object.
reservation.
The problem is there's a number of other committee meetings and things going on, and we really need to make sure that everybody's here to vote because this is so controversial.
That's why I'm proposing to announce at 12:27 that at 2:15, or if the gentlelady thinks 2:30.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I have no idea. It depends on when we vote on the floor. Then we go after that.
All right. I will withdraw my unanimous consent request, subject without prejudice to making another one.
Mr. Chairman?
For what purpose?
Would it be possible for us to vote when we're ready, finished with this, and vote when we should on committee? Is there something?
And what if we're finished when you're at the White House?
Well, I mean, right now. I mean, we could all finish and bring everybody in to vote.
Mr. Chairman?
From your lips to...
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
One thing I know is we will not finish now if we keep talking about my silly
Chairman,
request. The
the
gentleman from Indiana.
What I might suggest is that since there are a number of us that have various committee assignments and things that may take us away from here, maybe we could have a time frame within which we would have the vote so we know that we could come back during that time frame to vote. In other words, you say 2:15, from 2:15 to 2:45 or something like that.
In other words, essentially, we call the roll at 2:15 and keep the roll open till 2:45. Is there any objection to that suggestion? Without objection, that will be the order. Mr. Henry Clay. You didn't hear me, or I'm doing something I'm not allowed to do. You're saying I'm doing something I'm not allowed to do. Why don't you? I'm willing to take any embarrassment. Why don't you just talk? Why don't you tell us what you're thinking here?
would defer to the chief counsel, but I believe unless we spoke slowly for a half an hour to take the vote, I guess that would be okay, but we can't.
I am if I get unanimous consent to schedule a vote where the roll will be called in a regular order at 2:15, and but that roll will not close until 2:45. There's something in the House rules that keep me from doing that.
Well,
let's leave that as the decision now. I've received unanimous consent to call the roll at 2:15 and keep that roll open to 2:45. And if I'm advised that that isn't the proper way to do it, we'll come back with another suggestion.
Okay.
All right. The gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Inglis, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Moves to strike the last word. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just would associate myself with the comments by Mr. Delahunt and Mr. McCall. It's a very difficult question. If the atrocities were ongoing, then it seems to me the United States would have an obligation to act. But these are historical facts, and the current parties, which are different governments, are trying to work out that history and to come to some reconciliation. And so for us to enter that seems ill-advised, because this is while I would agree with what's been said here, that we see the facts of a genocide and we see the horrors, and the United States has already spoken on this. To enter now and to potentially disrupt the process, the reconciliation process, I think is ill-advised. It also, I think, the thing that affects me is have some information that it may in fact harm our Armenians, and so to have that our entrance into this actually harm people who are trying to seek reconciliation now seems like not a terribly good way to proceed. All countries have to deal with their past, and we all have things that we must work through about our past. Several things about our past have been mentioned here: our treatment of Native Americans, our treatment of slaves in America. We are still dealing with the scourges of those sins, and but to have other countries entering and trying to urge us along towards some resolution, when in fact the resolution is going to come in the hearts of Americans, and working through those things will take time. I think that's probably the same case with the Armenians and the Turks. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has been yielded back. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Woolsey, moves to strike the last word. The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I move to strike the last word. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to support it now. There will never be a perfect time, that's clear. I've been here 18 years, and I've been waiting to be able to vote on this, and on the floor particularly. All too often, the world has stood by while genocide rages. We saw it happen throughout Europe during World War II, and we saw it in Rwanda and Bosnia during the 1990s. We cannot undo the atrocities of the past, but we can acknowledge the actions, and we can give the victims and their families their rightful place in history. While they were in Congress, President Obama as a senator, Vice President Biden as a senator, and Secretary of State Clinton as a senator urged Congress to adopt the Armenian Genocide Resolution. Both President Bill Clinton and President George W. Bush recognized the horrific acts that led to the deportation of nearly 2 million Armenians, of whom 1.5 million men, women, and children were killed. 500,000 survivors were expelled from their homes, and and it succeeded in the elimination of the over 2,500-year presence of Armenians in their historic homeland. These events cannot be categorized as anything other than genocide. To deny that would be to deny the lives of those who perished. Ours will not be a lone voice. Today we will join with 42 United States states, 11 NATO allies, and the European Parliament if we vote for this resolution. And those who say that it's not the right time, I'll repeat it again, that this will upset international alliances, I have this to ask you. If not now, when? When will the victims and their families get their day of recognition? When will it be convenient? When will it not be an excuse to not go forward with a friendship between Turkey and Armenia because they want to have genocide proclaimed before, so they can go forward? I urge my colleagues to take a stand against genocide, to stand up for human rights, to stand up for justice, vote in favor of this resolution, and encourage our leadership to bring it up for a vote on the floor. I yield back.
If the gentlelady would yield?
Yes.
Thank you. Just because you started it, we have to continue, or let's not do that. I would like to make sure that our colleagues understand that was then, this is now. Senator Clinton might have given that response as a senator from New York, but when Secretary Clinton appeared before us last week in a response to Congressman Bozeman's questions, and I quote, "Well, Congressman, on Turkey-Armenia relations, it is our position that the normalization process that Turkey and Armenia have undertaken carries important benefits for both sides, and it should take place without preconditions and within a reasonable time frame."
Well, if the gentlelady will yield back,
yes,
I will reclaim my time. I'd just like to say I referred to the fact that this is when Secretary Clinton was a senator. That was then, and this is now. She was also representing the people of her state, and as I represent the people of my district, and now she's risen to higher
and is now
status strata.
To this
but I'm only saying she supported it when she was a senator, supporting those in her state, and I do yield back.
The gentlelady is yielded back, and balance of her time, and the gentleman from Texas, Judge Poe, moves to strike the last word.
I move to strike the word.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a interesting debate we're having today. Some say it's a hard decision. Hard decisions are what we're supposed to do. In my background, I've made hard decisions for 22 years. I look at this several ways. Armenians say one thing, and they're very passionate about it, and good for them. But the Turks say something different. To the Turks, the Armenians don't come to the table with necessarily clean hands. So there's the dispute between the two groups of people about something in our past or in the past. Resolutions haven't changed anything. 20 nations have adopted resolutions, and we're still talking about resolutions. Why would another resolution make a difference on this issue? I don't know that it would. So maybe we have to think of it and approach it from a different point of view. There are talks going on with Armenians and Turks. NGOs are talking. Protocols are being developed on talking this through and solving the problem. I believe that an ultimate decision must be solved by these two peoples, and it will be. So what is the United States' position? Should we take sides, so to speak? Well, maybe we should take the third side, which is the American side. What is in the best interest of the United States? Is it in the best interest of Americans to sign this resolution or adopt this resolution? I think not. And the reason being because of the situation we have with our own military. with our troops that are in harm's way, as my friend from Texas, Mr. McCall, has pointed out, and also that there are talks are going on. I personally think that if we adopt the resolution, these negotiations, these talks between the Turks and the Armenians, that will not be encouraged by our resolution. In fact, it may harm those talks, because I firmly believe this must be and will be resolved by these two groups of people who both are very strongly positioned to resolve this conflict once and for all. So I think it's in our best interest as a nation to not adopt this resolution, and I will vote no on the resolution, and I will yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman has yielded back the remainder of his time, and does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition? No. Does the gentleman from California seek recognition? The gentleman from California moves to strike the last word, Mr. Costa, and he's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing us the opportunity to debate this important resolution. As we approach the 95th anniversary of the start of the Armenian Genocide, I would call on my colleagues, notwithstanding all the issues that are before us, that we pass this resolution. I think by any reasonable standard, established history shows that between 1915 and 1923, the Ottoman Empire, not the present-day Turkish government, but the Ottoman Empire systematically killed an estimated 1.5 million Armenians and drove hundreds and thousands and others into exile from their ancestral homeland. This atrocity is well documented in the United States Archives. It's been universally accepted in the International Association of Genocide Scholars and broader academic communities. Now, as members of the Foreign Affairs Committee, we all approach this issue from different perspectives. One can debate specific historical incidences, but I can tell you from my own personal experiences, having grown up in Fresno, California, the land of William Saroyan, that I heard stories as a young man from my grandparents and from grandparents of my neighbors and friends of Armenian families about being forced to leave their homes, the stories of long marches and horrific murders systematically. Clearly, they believed this was a systematic approach to eliminate the Armenian communities in places that had been their home and farms for centuries. My Armenian friends in the neighborhoods that I grew up in believed this was a systematic approach among the first genocides of the 20th century, and so do I. The Armenian Genocide created a framework of genocide as we consider similar atrocities that continue to occur not only in the 20th century, but in the 21st century. It has been noted before, the Holocaust, Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and now Darfur. As leaders, we must not allow Turkey, with all due respect, to ask us to believe that the Armenian Genocide was not a genocide or that did not occur. In standing up to this policy of denial, we honor the martyrs of the genocide and encourage our Turkish allies, our friends of modern-day Turkey, to come to terms with this past. 3 years ago, I, as a part of this committee, visited Turkey. I met with the foreign minister. He is now the president of Turkey. I raised this issue. I talked about the fact that countries, including ours, have part of our past, as was noted here earlier, that we're not proud of. Certainly slavery was a part of our past that we were not proud of. But we've acknowledged that, and we've moved on. I suggested to then the foreign minister, who is now president, that Turkey work its way through this, because no one holds modern-day Turkey responsible for what took place 95 years ago. So in a very powerful, significant way, we reinforce our own vital role as Americans in leading the international community toward unconditional opposition to all instances of genocide. Supporters of this resolution are constantly told, and it's been said here today, that this is not the right time. Well, let me add my voice to those who have also indicated that if this is not the right time, please tell me when the right time will be. Genocide must never be something that is glossed over or forgotten. As world leaders, the United States must recognize this genocide and continue to strongly condemn any genocide around the world. As we stand up for human rights and American values, we simply cannot continue our policy of denial regarding the Armenian Genocide, the first in the 20th century that was recognized. So I encourage all of my members, all the members of this committee, to support House Resolution 252 to recognize the Armenian Genocide as a matter of fact by this Congress. So I proudly today, in honor of those who I grew up with, the Khazarians, the Collegians, the Bakers, the Abrahamians, the Carabians, and the Kashans, that listening to those stories as a young man, I never ever forgot. And this vote today that I will cast is in honor of their families who did suffer as a result of the Armenian Genocide. I lend back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake, for what purpose do you seek recognition?
I think, to strike the last word.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. I won't take a full 5 minutes. I just want to say that I don't intend to minimize the horrific events that happened so many years ago. I'm not a historian, but to me, it sure looked like a genocide. But I don't have so much a problem with the timing as I do the venue. We are not the arbiters of history here, and I don't think that we ought to assume or pretend that the rest of the world and all historians hangs on our every word. And I think that going down this road here assumes that, and it will open up other issues that we may not want to address, and it certainly opens up a lot of our own history that we'd rather, as has been said, move on from, having acknowledged it. But I don't think that we would want other countries digging back into our own history as well. So, as I said, I have more of a problem with the venue than the timing. I simply don't think that it's our proper role to take this up at this time. And so I will be voting no, and I yield back.
Gentleman has yielded back his time. The gentleman, well, let me just tell people where we are now. We have a unanimous consent adopted that calls the roll at 2:15. We will need people here for that roll call. That roll will stay open until 2:45, and that's the situation. I know there are White House schedules that change all the time, but this, in terms of everybody, and I understand that, but this is the window we have. We will have the last votes sometime between 2:30 and 3:15, and then we won't. So this roll call is called at 2:15. The gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Allison.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, it's not an overstatement to say that one of the reasons I went to Congress is to fight for human rights. It's one of the reasons I'm here at all. And therefore, I must speak out for justice and oppose atrocities wherever they might be committed. And in recognizing the Armenian Genocide, we remember and honor not only those who died in that tragic event, but we also renew our commitment to address calamities that are happening around our world today. To the Armenian people, I extend my condolences for their families of those who were killed and displaced. As members of Congress, we cannot change their past, but we can give comfort to those who survived and acknowledge the memories of those who perished. We can stand vigilant for human rights in this hour and in this time. To the Turkish people, I respect and admire your great contributions to diplomacy, peace, and cooperation. My vote for this resolution is not a vote against the Turkish government. This resolution is not aimed at the Turkish government. This resolution addresses a prior government. However, I still know that the vote today may hurt and cause hurt for many, and I'm sorry for that. To my colleagues in Congress, we must reflect on our own past and acknowledge that the U.S. has committed grave injustices to Native Americans, African Americans, and others, and may be well considered a genocide. And yet there's never been a resolution in the United States Congress calling actions against Native Americans or African Americans genocide. If we're willing to acknowledge a tragedy that happened nearly 100 years ago, halfway across the world, then we should at least look into our own history and heal the wounds caused by our past. And that's why I've asked my staff to begin such a resolution, which I hope people will support. Finally, we must ensure that this resolution does not impair the efforts to normalize relations between Armenia and Turkey. There might be some who would use this resolution to undermine the progress that has been made, but we must remain committed to the people of Turkey and Armenia and support them in their protocols towards greater cooperation. Let us remind ourselves that remembering the past offenses must not deflect our attention from the current needs of the Armenian and Turkish peoples. The best way to honor the dead is to show support for the living, and we should pledge our support and our continued assistance to Armenia and Turkey and the people who live there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman has yielded back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bilrakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Moves to strike the last word. Recognized for 5 minutes.
I appreciate the opportunity to make a statement on this meaningful resolution. H.R. 252 recognizes a genocide, the massacre of 1.5 million innocent Armenian men and women and children at the hands of the Ottoman Empire from 1915 to 1923. History can't be denied. The proof is irrefutable on the Armenian genocide. Genocides, wherever and whenever they occur, cannot be ignored, whether they took place in the 20th century by the Ottomans or mid-20th century by the Third Reich or currently in Darfur. Genocide must be acknowledged for what it is, a scourge on the human race. In keeping with the humanitarian spirit of America and this legislative body, we should be the global leaders in recognizing and condemning all genocides, past and present. Why is this important now? Because denying genocide sets a dangerous precedent that makes future genocides more likely. As such, I support the Armenian Genocide resolution. The Armenian genocide must not be put on the back burner of history for fear of acknowledging the truth or offending our ally, Turkey. This resolution simply, once and for all, seeks to characterize the deliberate extermination of 1.5 million Armenians as genocide. For the sake of commemorating every instance of genocide so as to prevent its recurrence, let us adopt this resolution today and urge its final passage on the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Missouri, the chair of the International Organization's Human Rights and Oversight Subcommittee, Mr. Carnahan, seeks recognition.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, and all those here today, I have great respect for this debate, the strong feelings on all sides. But today, this committee has convened to consider H.R. 252, a non-binding resolution calling on the President to ensure that the foreign policy of the United States reflects understanding and sensitivity concerning issues related to human rights, ethnic cleansing, and genocide related to the Armenian genocide. As we prepare to make this important decision, it is equally important to recall the United States foreign policy has very long reflected these sensitivities. The historic facts are undeniable, and we share and will continue to share with the Armenian people and all people the solemn remembrance of the terrible atrocities of 1915. In 1999, President Clinton urged Americans to learn from the past while looking to the future and, quote, recommit themselves to building a world where such events never occur again. In 2008, President Obama also acknowledged the importance of addressing the past while working for the future. President Obama affirmed, quote, it's really about how the Turkish and Armenian people deal with the past, and the best way forward for the Turkish and Armenian people is a process that works through the past in a way that is honest, open, and constructive. Accordingly, it is important that the United States support the efforts that have been already initiated to open a process of discussion based on mutual respect and sensitivity, aimed at reaching a bilateral consensus on the historical atrocities committed in the final years of the Ottoman Empire. This process will have to be serious, sober, and deeply reflective for both the Armenian and Turkish people working together for a strong future. Last year, we saw brave historic steps taken by both sides to improve bilateral relations and usher in a new era of peaceful coexistence and mutual prosperity. The United States has supported these normalization efforts, and I believe we must continue to do so, especially within the context of the struggles we still face combating terrorism, securing peace in the Middle East, as well as our critical cooperation on Iran with our allies on the UN Security Council. We must allow, encourage, and commend the progress made between Armenia and Turkey to continue as their governments work to ratify the protocols of their historic record. These include a process of historic review that will allow Armenia and Turkey to deal with their past together. We must also remember the whole of our foreign policy objectives, including our responsibility to our citizens, our troops, for our national security, to stabilize Iraq and Afghanistan, and prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons, as well as to promote ongoing reconciliation between Armenia and Turkey. Turkey is a longtime friend and ally on a number of key issues. In this context, I believe it is an inappropriate time for this resolution. I must vote no on the resolution at this time.
Gentleman has yielded back his time, and the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Paul, is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I find this vote difficult because voting yes or no would not represent my position. It has been mentioned by other speakers already that this does not serve American interest to even bring this subject up. And that would be what I would consider the best position, is not by not having issues like this come up. But those who spoke against it spoke eloquently about why neutrality on this issue serves American interests the best. I only wish that that same principle would be applied to our foreign policy. It is almost a compulsion on our part to always be involved in the internal affairs and the conflicts of other nations when it's not necessary for us to do this. And this is more or less a reflection of this. So I don't see there's going to be any advantage to us to pass this. Matter of fact, I see a lot of disadvantages. It won't resolve anything. There were a lot of tragedies in the 20th century. There were 262 million people killed by their own governments in the 20th century. There were 34 million people killed in armed conflict. There's so much tragedy, and to iron that out and solve these problems and decide who's to get the most blame from governments that don't exist any longer, I see no purpose in that. It doesn't serve our benefit. But it's also disappointing to me about how these issues come up and the conflicts come. One of my goals, long-term goals, has always been to strive for eliminating hyphenated Americans. I don't like the idea that we have so many groups that are hyphenated. So they have lobbyist group to serve the interests of this group of Americans against another group of Americans. And then you have foreign lobbyists come in and foreign governments and represents one government over the other. Truly, if we had a republic, we wouldn't be dealing with this kind of a problem being brought up constantly over many, many years, decades. We have been dealing with this. But the purpose that I see for this is doing nothing. The consequence will be nothing more than just stirring the pot. We're going to stir the pot, and nothing is going to be settled, and it'll come up again. And yet, the evidence is rather clear. So many have spoken already that the two countries that are involved have been working and trying to work this out. That's the way it should be. And my argument for less intervention around the world really fits into this argument. But those who are arguing for the non-intervention and staying out of this and see so clearly how this does not serve our special interests, I would just suggest to them to look at our foreign policy as well, because getting involved in the military conflicts of the world have an immediate consequence much worse than us getting involved in this. In circumstances like this, I think we as congressmen have a perfect right to have personal opinions and historic opinions. But to try to solve the emotional conflicts that have gone on by legislation and taking one side over another and having one hyphenated American group against another hyphenated American group, one country against another country, this does not serve our interests. It doesn't serve the cause of peace, and it would be much better if we look forward rather than backwards. I think a resolution like this looks backwards. So I'll be voting no, not because I'm taking a position, but precisely because my position is I hopefully someday in the future will have a lot less of this discussion and these resolutions coming up, not only dealing with the past, but also the current events that have today, as well as our future around the world. I think the position that we look after our own interests and follow a policy where we don't get involved in the internal affairs of other nations or the conflict of other nations would serve our interests well. And that is not dropping out. That is not ignoring the world, because there's no reason why we can't pursue a foreign policy where we talk with people, have diplomacy with people, trade with people, and friendship with people, without picking sides. The squabbles should be dealt with by governments themselves or the people themselves within a country. At the same time, if there's border disputes or disputes between countries, it should involve them rather than us believing that we can come in and settle the dispute and make the world better. I think if we take a position of more neutrality and independence away from making these decisions, the better off the world would be. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentlelady from California seeks recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank you and Ranking Member Ross Layton for bringing this bill, HRES 252, for consideration before the committee. I am one of those who will be at the White House, and I just want to register my support for the bill. I'm going to try to get back before the vote, Mr. Chairman, but I join my colleagues today in recognition of one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century, the Armenian Genocide. The Armenian Genocide, of course, began in 1915 when Armenian leaders were rounded up, deported, and killed. 1.5 million Armenians were murdered and countless others displaced and deported. The world must not forget the Armenian Genocide, nor the lives that this event claimed. We should never, ever forget this, and this resolution, I think, is extremely important in this day and time. Many political leaders, scholars, and professional organizations have worked tirelessly to acknowledge this devastating event to the Armenian people. And there are still a number of survivors of the genocide here in our own country, many of their children and grandchildren who reside throughout our country. We must never forget the heinous acts that victimize their families. If we let such atrocities be forgotten, then we are in danger of letting them be repeated. And I have to thank my colleague, Congressman Adam Schiff, who has for so long tried to get this Congress to do the right thing. So thank you, Congressman Schiff, for your leadership and for staying strong in spite of the opposition that you're faced with. Even now, in the 21st century, we have watched for years as genocide has ravaged Darfur. The Holocaust, slavery. I'm an African-American, descendant of slaves. These horrific events of our time must always be remembered. Since the Darfur genocide, for example, it began in 2003, hundreds of villages have been destroyed, an estimated 2.7 million people have been displaced, and more than 400,000 people have died. So this resolution, again, reminds us that we must do everything within our power to ensure atrocities like these never happen again or risk condemning our children to a world caught in a cycle of hate and bloodshed. And so with that in mind, I urge my colleagues on this committee to support this resolution. We have no option but to do that. Thank you again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Congressman Schiff, for your leadership.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry, moves to strike the last word, is recognized for 5 minutes.
I move to strike the last word. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll be fairly brief. Mr. Chairman, the tragedy of the Armenian Genocide clearly is a very powerful and painful memory in the collective conscience of the region of Turkey as well as Armenia, and it's understandable. America can recognize this and work for reconciliation as may be appropriate given our leadership in the world. But, Mr. Chairman, I am very concerned that this resolution before this committee may not actually be a force for reconciliation. It may complicate reconciliation in the area where it matters most. And where it matters most is not this committee. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from California, the chair of the Terrorism, Nonproliferation, and Trade Subcommittee, Mr. Sherman, seeks to strike the last word and is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge our two colleagues and their leadership, Adam Schiff and Frank Pallone, who have been here throughout. I want to acknowledge the ambassador of Armenia, who is in the audience, Mr. Tatul Markarian, and I want to thank him for the detachment of Armenian soldiers who fought for 4 years alongside Americans in Iraq, and for the detachment that was sent 2 months ago to fight alongside Americans in Afghanistan. And I want to apologize for the fact that this ambassador had to sit here while an opponent of this resolution falsely stated that Armenians have not fought alongside Americans in these recent conflicts. I want to also acknowledge the survivors who are here. If someone has to ask, why do it now? Why not put it off? How long are you asking these survivors to wait? And shouldn't we do it while they're here to see it? We have seen many people come here and say, shouldn't we have both sides reconcile? We all long for that. We've seen in many parts of the world truth and reconciliation commissions, a truth and reconciliation process, and it's worked. I have not seen falsehood and cover-up commissions lead to reconciliation. Now, one side in the protocols, the Armenian side, supports this resolution. The same president of Armenia who signed the protocol supports this resolution and believes that it will help lead to the reconciliation that those protocols envision. The other side has basically thrown away the protocols. When the Prime Minister of Turkey says that another issue, not germane to the protocols, that of Nagorno-Karabakh, will hold them up forever, that he will not ratify those protocols until the people of Armenia abandon the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. What he's basically doing is saying, thanks for signing the protocols, now I'm throwing them away. So those protocols are dead unless we do something to shake things up. And nothing would do more than to show the people of Turkey that we cannot be cowed into denying the genocide, the first genocide of the 20th century. Because genocide denial is not just the last step of the genocide. It is the first step in the next genocide. And that is why Hitler, when faced with some wavering compatriots, was able to say, we can get away with the Holocaust. After all, who today speaks of the annihilation of the Armenians? We are told that somehow this will hurt our relationship with Turkey. Long term, we will not have a good relationship with Turkey until Turkey abandons this effort to deny the past and engage in genocide denial. Would we have a good relationship with a German government that was denying the Holocaust? And who would have a good relationship with us if we were denying slavery and so many other things of our past? And as the gentleman from American Samoa pointed out, the Comfort Woman resolution passed this committee even over the objection of our good friends in Japan. Now, it is unseemly for this, the greatest parliament in the world, to be cowed into not recognizing what the opponents of the resolution, so many of them, describe as the truth, because we're afraid of Turkish retaliation. But it is particularly unseemly in light of the fact that Turkey has proven that these threats are false, that we are cowering in the face of a paper tiger. Let's go through the record. Turkey threatened harsh retribution to countries that recognized the genocide, and then took only token diplomatic steps, or no steps at all, against Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Argentina, and 10 other countries. 40 American states have recognized the Armenian Genocide, and our trade relations between those states and Turkey have only grown. The greatest attempt outside the United States was an attempt to try to prevent France from recognizing the genocide. In 2001, France passed a law recognizing the Armenian Genocide. In the subsequent 6 years, exports from France to Turkey went up fourfold, even after France had been threatened with a boycott. And in fact, there have been massive increases in exports by Belgium, Canada, Greece, Italy, Lebanon, and Russia to Turkey. Perhaps the key to getting Turkey on our side is to pass this resolution. That's not what they say, but that's what seems to happen when you look at their recent past. Turkey should acknowledge we've provided them with $23 billion in aid. We saved them from communism. We helped build the pipeline that brings them oil today. We prevented an independent Kurdish state in northern Iraq, and we are the loudest voice for helping Turkey enter the European Union. With all that, they shouldn't also ask us to act like cowards and deny the truth. I yield back.
The time of the gentleman has expired. We have only a few minutes left for a vote. It is based on, after consultations with the ranking member, it is the intention of the chair to recess this committee till 2:10. Allow Ambassador Watson and Mr. Bozeman to have their time to speak, and then go to the roll call at 2:15. We need to have a working quorum for the start of that roll call vote, and that roll call will continue until 5 minutes after the last vote in the next round of votes closes. In other words,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
We will begin voting at 2:15, or as soon as those two members finish their remarks. Mr. Bozeman and Ambassador Watson. And any others who may...
Oh, well, let's not say any others.
Okay, that's why I want to make sure. So we have these two speakers, and then we will commence voting. So we can tell everybody,
yes,
our side, 2:15, more or less.
We will need a working quorum to commence the roll call.
Thank you, sir.
And that I expect that to be right around 2:15 under this outline. So the committee is now recessed until 2:10, in which time I will recognize Mr. Bozeman and expect the roll call to start at 2:15.
And it will end
5 minutes after the next round of votes after this one ends. On the floor ends.
Good.
In other words, I'll be here all afterwards.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to remind you, if you leave, you cannot save your seat. If you leave, then you lose your seat, okay? Thanks.